Well, good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We talk every week at this time about the river, about the history and health of the river. Sometimes we look at slides because I've written 2 books on the subject. Sometimes we have learned people in, and we have a learned guest today. It's Jared Eigerman. He is the president of the city council here in Newburyport. Jared, thank you very much for being part of this podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we talk about the history and health of the river. We talk about other things as well. And Jared, one thing I wanted to ask you is you've been a city councilor for a while. You're the president of the council now. Maybe you can talk a little about what the president does. When I covered the city council, the mayor did most of the work and most of the initiatives. However, I followed your activity as president. What does a president of the council do?
Okay, well, the president is elected by his or her peers. So, and the president's actually elected every year, even though our legislative term is 2 years. So I'll be running again for presidency on January 11th, our next meeting, first of the year. The initial task is to organize the council into committees. So by law, actually, under our local ordinances, we have standing committees that must be filled with 3 councilors each. And we're meant to do our work in committee. So we delegate things. For example, one of the most important standing committees would be budget and finance. So the council president is the person who assigns people. So that's the first thing, is you're trying to manage personnel and match skill sets with tasks. Then also the president always has the ability to form ad hoc committees. For example, we took ownership, the city did finally, of the old NRA, Newburyport Redevelopment Authority.
Yes.
Right, and you know, that's a long time coming. That's a very important task, is to figure out what to do with those lands to build a park. So I formed an ad hoc with 5 out of the 11 councilors. That's one of the biggest committees we have. The other thing that the president does is preside at every meeting of the council. So before the meeting, I work with the city clerk to figure out what's going on the agenda and what order. Have sometimes make judgment calls about letting people make presentations or not. You know, we have limited time, so you can't just have an open mic.
Well, I thought one of the greatest things that you did, your team did, or your council did, you mentioned the NRA land. It was only 3 or 4 years ago when they were planning to put up condos, and you know, most communities don't have a lot of land on the water anyway. We do, but to me, and I was a journalist at the time, the thought of, you know, 4.2 acres, some part of it disappearing to people who could buy $1 million condos was a very poor idea. How do you look back on that when the council was looking at that, letting those that land go to condos?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, so I came on about 7 years ago. So when I was running, there was sort of an assumption that the redevelopment authority was going to, redevelopment agency, excuse me, was going to remain in existence indefinitely. That doesn't really make any sense, because the actual urban renewal plan that they were working under had already expired in 2005. So that's 15 years ago. So it was already a weird situation where we had a redevelopment authority or agency, but they didn't have a plan. So that's strange. When I ran, I did see the merit of trying to generate revenue on an ongoing basis. So at that time, my argument was, and it's in Ward 2, my ward, you could do rental housing, and we've had rental housing down at the waterfront for decades on Market Square. But condos are not a good idea, because condo owners, especially if they've shelled out big dollars to buy their condos, they're not very welcoming of the public having concerts or walking through. So that was a privatization that I opposed. that project didn't go anywhere anyway, even with the
How
rent.
about the one, there is a project, it's completely different, of course, but it's down on the land between the old Black Cow and Michael's. There's quite
Yeah.
a, the Karp family owns that, and there was quite a bit of discussion about building maybe even 200 condos, possibly a hotel. Is that still on the boards, or,
No, not really.
is it not as,
No, I mean, again, we were, so in my 7 years, once I got on, we were thinking holistically. So first we were thinking, all right, and I was appointed by the president at the time, Councilor O'Brien, to chair an ad hoc committee to bring in all the parties, the NRA, the Committee on an Open Waterfront, the Waterfront Trust, et cetera, and figure out, all right, what are we going to do with this waterfront, the publicly owned waterfront?
Mhm.
And just to finish that off, the consensus was we want to build a park. We don't really want to have any buildings. We don't want to have any private development there. Let's just build a park. And so finally, 2 years ago, the city council took the initiative, and working with the mayor, we got special legislation passed in Beacon Hill, and so the NRA was dissolved and the land was reverted to the city for a park. Okay,
Mhm.
now you're asking about what's often called Waterfront West, that area to the west of the Black Cow and to Michael's. That's been privately owned for over 100 years. The current owner is New England Development, very big commercial developer in Massachusetts, mostly shopping malls, but they've done some mixed use. So yes, for a couple of years there, they had come into us and said, all right, we're ready to redevelop this land. A lot of it is really just surface parking right now, or boat storage. And again, the council and the planning board together, we kicked the tires on a proposal, and it died. It died 2 years ago, I think it was, and they haven't been back. The chair of the Planning and Development Committee, whom I appointed, Heather Shand, so she represents Ward 3, which is just adjacent to Ward 2, obviously. She was going to have a series of meetings from the city side to figure out what in 2020, what should we do with Waterfront West if we were to rezone it? What would we want to see there? That all went away because of COVID. It just collapsed. The group couldn't meet in person, of course, and the will wasn't there. There doesn't seem to be any current initiative from New England Development anymore. The bottom line, sorry, but the main detraction, what detracted from their proposal that failed a couple of years ago, is just too tall. I mean, it was too big. They wanted to do.
As we look at the future and of the river, and there has been much discussion, and people have been disconcerted about the sewage discharges upriver.
Yeah.
When the rainwater and the effluent goes into a treatment plant in a Lowell or Lawrence or Haverhill or Manchester, New Hampshire. Is there anything the city can do to influence those communities to improve their sewage treatment? Or is that kind of a situation that we don't have any control or influence over?
I really don't think we have any influence other than litigation. So, we are the small end of the district. I want to give credit, as I had in a past show, to the state senator and our state rep. So that's Diana DeZoglio and Jim Kelcourse. They represent Newburyport ably and have advocated for us in the legislature, but we just don't have the population to win a legislative battle. It doesn't work. We're only 18,000 people. So they're working hard on sort of negotiating, but this is not a new issue. It's changed. It's gotten worse because of climate change, and there are more releases of raw sewage than there ever were before. It used to be industrial pollution that we suffered from upriver. Again, it has to be there has to be some outside pressure. The outside pressure used to be the Clean Water Act under federal law, and we would have standing, I believe, to litigate that.
You know, when we talk about the Clean Water Act, which the one I'm thinking about was passed in 1972, Ed Muskie of Maine was ahead of that. George Mitchell was involved in important amendments in 1987. But do you think there'll be a time, as it appears, that we're going to have a new administration in Washington, when
Yeah.
grants would become more available? Because most communities need grants. I mean, there is low interest loan funds at this point, but grants are a beautiful thing. Do you think we'll ever see a time when grants for improving sewage treatment plants will come back into use?
Yes, I do. And I think I should elaborate on my assertion that litigation is the path. What the litigation does is spur action. Lawrence and Lowell don't have the money
Mm,
themselves to mitigate and retrofit
right.
their plants. So what the litigation will do is create the fire under them and the federal government to come up with those grants. That's the way I look at it.
Mhm.
You need that outside pressure. So, the grants in the early 70s and mid 70s had to do with the political impetus behind that was it was just so horrible um,
Now,
that
do you remember Dirty River yourself? You spent a lot of time growing up here in Newburyport. Do you remember Dirty River?
yes, I remember it as a kid. So again, I didn't go on the river very often. We had family friends who were members of the American Yacht Club, and there was a ton of sailing in Newburyport always. That's
Mhm.
always been true, even when the river was horribly polluted. There were a lot fewer boats
Yeah.
because it just didn't smell very good. And also until the mid 80s when they finished the boardwalk, it wasn't really a place to hang out the waterfront.
Mhm.
You'd go to Plum Island. You'd walk around Moseley Pines and look at the river, but you didn't really recreate on the river. It was kind of junky. So that is and that's the irony of this is that we got through that. There was cleanup of industrial effluent in the river. There was a rebirth of Newburyport. Now the river is more pleasant than it's been in anyone's memory. But we have the climate change problem, and so
Mhm.
one step forward, two steps back. So we really, it's imperative that we do something about it. It's bad business. It's not just quality of life. We have now built sort of a summer tourist
Oh,
industry
yes, absolutely.
centered on the river. So we have to we can't drop this issue.
So this is 96.3 radio, Joppa Radio. We're also on Comcast local television. I'm talking to Jared Eigerman. He is the president of the city council. And, there was one good point I must bring up. Manchester, New Hampshire, which was the largest polluter upriver, recently did sign an agreement with state and federal officials for a major improvement of their sewage treatment plant. So,
Mhm.
to make steps forward, it's a 20-year plan, but on the other hand, it's over $100 million. So Manchester will get cleaner, and perhaps other areas will. When you think of today's issues and whatever, you're meeting with the city council, you're meeting remotely. Is that working out, Jared? Can you get a good meeting in and a good interchange with citizens from a remote situation?
It's adequate. I mean, it's not as good. Um, there's the upside has been it has allowed more residents to dial in from the comfort of their home in an evening than maybe would not have bothered coming to City Hall. The downside, though, especially for counselors dealing with each other and also the administration, we deal with staff, is we don't even always have our cameras on uniformly. Sometimes staff don't have their cameras on. Some counselors don't turn their cameras on. You can't read body language, and uh, that leads to misunderstandings.
Mhm.
It does. So it's not as efficient. We are working very hard. We have a lot of meetings, so I don't want to make it seem as if everything came to a stop. It didn't. It's just not as good.
I remember the meetings, and I won't go into the subjects, but I covered the city council for about 5 years. And some meetings, you'd have dozens of people enter the hallway wanting to speak. Other meetings, you didn't have as many people. But I think there might be about a 1% tax increase in Newburyport. It's not as large as it could have been. It could have been twice and 2.5 times larger. But there will be a small tax increase. Is that because of the COVID, Jared, or are there other municipal issues at play?
Well, they're just ongoing, even without COVID. Healthcare costs are notoriously stubborn. They keep going up and up for our employees. And that's just something that really hard for a little place like Newburyport to control. We're victims of the market on that one. The schools, we are still trying to catch up. I mean, there was just a decimation of our school department long ago when things changed, and we're really I think we've only done about a 23% increase over 5 years. So we're keeping pace, but there's more to spend on. So to not increase taxes at all, that would have been very difficult. Now, I actually think we got through. I mean, the mayor would know better, and she's a better person to interview on that. But and again, I talk to the mayor weekly, sort of the liaison between the council and the administration. We did okay in calendar 2020. We're in the middle of our fiscal year, so fiscal year won't end until July 1, 2021. We're more concerned about 2021 calendar year. We're strong with our real property tax, but the aid from the state is very questionable. And obviously retail and restaurant is just struggling.
Yeah, it's been a difficult time.
Yeah.
In terms of issues and things that come and go, there is a discussion of youth services, a youth services building, a youth services expansion, perhaps. And you've been involved in that. I think there's some discussion of taking a property on Low Street, which is used for, well, why don't you talk about it? It's a national excess property, in my view. But where do we stand on a possible youth services on Low Street?
Okay, well, the first thing that people have to realize is that this is another long-standing, not as long-standing issue, not as long-standing as the Central Waterfront, which was 40, 50 years, but for 7 years, the Brown School, the elementary school in the South End, has been closed. That was our last neighborhood school. And Youth Services, which is a fairly new department, which does social services. It's not just recreational, but also sort of social work with children and families. They moved into the Brown School, took over the whole ground floor. They came from the Kelly School, which was a much smaller school, didn't have any land, didn't have a playground, didn't have a gymnasium. So they've been there now in the Brown School for fully 6 years. And meanwhile, as the Ward 2 counselor, Brown School is in my ward. I've been working with the administration and the planning department and 2 different Ward 1 counselors over the years to figure out what are we going to do with the Brown School and where are we going to put youth services. And we've been all over the place. We started out in 2014, we had drawings for youth services to stay on the ground floor.
Yes.
Again, it was a school for 100 years or 90 years, so it works well for them. But it has to be invested in. That we haven't, the school department didn't put any money into that building for the last, 20 years they were there, and now it's been another 6. We also looked at some sort of a revenue generation scheme where we put out a request for proposals to generate cash by selling the Brown School and then using that money to build something new for youth services. The problem is we just can't generate enough money at the Brown School.
Well, I hope whatever happens, you keep the gymnasium. I was a kid who grew up near a gym, and in the cold winters, an indoor gym is a beautiful thing. But please,
well, that you're putting your finger on the problem. There are limitations here. So, for example, the playground is protected under the state constitution. You can't eliminate a playground, a property that's been dedicated as a playground, such as the Brown School playground, unless you go to the legislature and come up with substitute land. So that's not going anywhere. So right at the start, if you're trying to sell it to the highest bidder, the playground is still going to be there, and they develop on it. They can't park on it either. Similarly, to demolish the gymnasium in a city that we don't have very many gymnasiums.
That's true.
And that's a real hit. To build a gymnasium, you think, well, what's the big deal? It's just a big shed. It's easily a couple $1 million.
Oh, easily, yeah.
Easily, even if it's just the bare bones shed of a basketball court with nothing. So those were limitations, and the best we could do if we were to sell the Brown School was to get something in the order of I think it was $1.7 million. That's not worth it. What you give up wasn't worth it. And actually, you wouldn't get any real affordable housing out of that either. That's another public need. We have limited places we can put subsidized affordable housing. The market is not going to build subsidized affordable housing. They can't make any money on it.
Right.
So we have to build it. And the advantage of the Brown School and the youth services staying there, which was our original thought in 2014, is those can coexist. You can have on the upper 2 stories, you could fit in physically 24 senior affordable units, which for a city like Newburyport is pretty good. And, again, nobody's making any more of it unless we do. And just as at the YWCA on Market Street, they also have senior affordable units with a gymnasium and a pool, and those have coexisted for decades. It's fine. It's unlike luxury condos. Again, people who buy luxury condos are not as tolerant of noise and
absolutely
other things.
Well, your point about that on the waterfront, I thought the same thing. And this is back to the NRA land, that once wealthy people get in, they're not going to want concerts. They're not going to want to have party people having picnics on the lawn.
You're asking for trouble. Yes, you can. It'll just be conflict forever. Doesn't mean they won't maybe be able to stop the concerts. Just as if you had youth services below luxury condos, they couldn't stop it. But it's just constant conflict. You don't want to do that to yourself. Okay, so an alternative was, well, what if youth services were to move entirely, give up, their space at the Brown School, if we were to build them a new complex, so we could build them the same amount of square footage, which is considerable what they have at Brown School. It's an old school. So something like 7,000 or 8,000 square feet of classrooms and so on, a gymnasium, which is another 7,000 square feet, a parking lot, and a playground. And the only site that was identified was a surplus site next to the armory. Now that site had been looked at a long time ago by a previous administration when we were trying to build a senior center.
And there are wetlands issues in addition, are there not?
Yeah, so more than half of the site is wetlands, delineated. The administration hired someone to delineate it, figure out where the wetlands were. Our Conservation Commission has not certified that delineation, so they may actually be larger. But so at least half of it is covered by wetlands. And then of course we have buffer zones. You can't build right next to a wetland. By law, you have to stay back a certain distance. When you take all that into account, the actual size of this piece of land, 57 Low Street, is smaller than the Brown School, ironically. And then the construction cost came back this summer. We hired the architects that had done the teen center down in Brookline. And so, it's kind of a sexy, well-known project, and we thought we might replicate that. It came in over $10 million to do that.
Yeah,
so that included and that included building on the wetland too, which is something that is contrary to our policy. So you'd have to build on the wetland to fit it onto this piece of land at 57 Low. We could get the land fairly cheaply, $220,000, because we're getting a cut rate as a city, and it would be limited to city uses. You couldn't flip it for housing. That would be allowed. But you could jam on all this stuff. You get like a 22, 25 car parking lot, which is not huge, but it's something. But it's over 10 million. And our understanding right now from the wrestling with us over the years, we only have about $10 million of bonding capacity for everything in the whole city that we want to do. So that is just not feasible.
Talking before I forget to ask you about this, this isn't controversial, I don't think, but what is going to happen to the parcel at State and High Street? There was a mobile gas station there. I think that's near your house, actually.
It is.
Any plans for that? I haven't seen anything on that.
Yeah. I'm not within 300 feet, but of course I walk by it all the time. It's at the corner. It's the old mobile station. It was originally Mayor Bossy Gillis created that that station by moving a house to Dalton Street.
But you think a house might replace that, or does it? It doesn't have to be industrial. I mean,
well, no, and in fact, the zoning does not allow a gas station. So the gas station appears to have been abandoned. It's been a certain number of years. They haven't even tried to lease it to anybody. They pulled out the tanks. So as a matter of law, you can't do a gas station anymore. You could do, two-family house and so on. Sure. But I have heard nothing. I have no information. I don't know.
Well, it's great to have you. This is Jared Eigerman I'm talking to. This is Life Along the Merrimack. And Jared, you spent a lot of time growing up here. You lived out in California for a while. You came back home. Mm-hmm. You enjoyed, I think you've been here for a decade this time, about that. How have you thought about your return to Newburyport? You've become a leader in the community. Are you pleased you came back home?
I am. I mean, I wasn't from California, so I was always kind of an alien. I built a good life out there, but really the decision point, it's now 13 years ago, was when we had our son. So we had our first child, and I knew that if I didn't move back home then, I probably wasn't going to. And I would be in California forever. Now, there are worse fates than being stuck in California for the rest of your life. And I would have been fine, but no, I much prefer it here. My wife, who's from California, has some relatives here and has taken to the weather, and it's an interesting place. I think it's frankly, a better place to raise kids. If when they are 18, they want to go to California and live the dream, great, they can do that. But for us, no, it's been a good return. It's been a lot of hard work on the city council, but it's my hometown, and it's worth it.
Yeah. So my wife and I, Dyke Hendrickson, we lived in Northern California for a while. We moved here in the 80s, but any big issues coming up this winter, Jared? I mean, we've got the COVID, which is terrific. How has the city been able? It seems like the city is doing a good job in keeping us informed and doing the best they can with public health. A short word on COVID, if you would. We just have about a minute or two.
Yeah, I think we've coped well. I want to give credit to the administration on that. As it's been awkward because it's a health emergency. It's really our health board that has jurisdiction to order things like wearing masks and closing stores and so on. Now our health board is appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, and three of them are physicians. They're private citizens. So it's been awkward for them. They're not really used to having these momentous decisions. But I think, and also the state has sometimes blown hot and cold, but overall, I think we've done a good job of not overwhelming our ICU at Anna Jake's Hospital. That to me is the prime directive. Do not overwhelm the intensive care. And so far we've avoided that. So I count that as a victory. I think the big things that are coming up in 2021, we really do need to make some decisions on capital improvements that we've postponed. So to finish the story, what I believe, and so does Councilor Zeid, I joined on to his legislation that, we're done messing around with what we're going to do with youth services. We don't have $10 million,
Right.
So we proposed a $1 million bond to go on top of $700,000 that's already been sitting in the bank for them for years. So it's time to make a decision,
Good.
spend the money. Similarly, our fire stations, we've been talking about that.
Right.
Those are big ticket items. We can't replace both stations. That would be 15 million easy. We don't have 15 million.
So there are
And
plenty of
those decisions,
destinations
it's
for the
time.
money.
It's time to make those decisions. We need to do that before the fall election.
Yeah. Well, this was Jared Eigerman. He's the president of the city council. I'm Dyke Hendrickson, the host of the podcast known as Life Along the Merrimack. Thank you very much for listening and for watching. And Jared, thank you again for being part of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Jared.